July 27th, 2002. A sunny afternoon in Ukraine. Over 10,000 families gather to watch an air show celebrating military aviation. Within seconds, what should have been a spectacular display of aerial prowess becomes one of aviation's most horrific disasters. But was it pilot error, or was something far more sinister at play? You're watching Darchives, where we uncover the truth behind history's darkest moments. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button because today's investigation reveals how a routine air show turned into a nightmare that authorities desperately tried to cover up. This is the story of the Sknyliv disaster and the shocking truth about who was really to blame. The air show at Sknyliv airfield was meant to mark the 60th anniversary of the Ukrainian 14th Air Corps, a celebration of national pride and military prowess. Over 10,000 spectators, including families with young children and senior military officials, gathered on what should have been a perfect day for aviation. The star of the show was the Su-27 Flanker, a Soviet-era twin-engine beast capable of breathtaking aerial maneuvers, like the famous Pugachev's Cobra, the same spectacular move Tom Cruise performs in Top Gun Maverick. Flying this impressive but demanding aircraft were two experienced pilots. Vladimir Topar, a seasoned aviator with 27 years of flying experience and member of the elite Ukrainian Falcons aerobatic team, and his co-pilot Yuri Yegorov. On paper, everything looked perfect. Experienced pilots, proven aircraft, perfect weather, and an enthusiastic crowd ready to witness Ukrainian military excellence. But beneath the pageantry, critical failures were already in motion. In the weeks leading up to the show, Topar had requested practice flights at Sknyliv airfield to familiarize himself with the layout, a reasonable request for any pilot performing at an unfamiliar venue. The Air Force denied his request, citing cost concerns. While this might sound dangerous to civilians, military pilots are trained to adapt to unfamiliar territory. After all, you don't get practice runs in war zones. Topar was briefed using military-grade intelligence and maps and had performed his planned routine countless times before. However, local pilots familiar with the site had already begun raising serious concerns about the event's organization, describing it as chaotic at best. The warning signs were so obvious that at least one experienced pilot pulled out of the show entirely, citing poor preparation and safety concerns. Despite these red flags, the show's organizers pushed forward, prioritizing spectacle over safety. Then came the day of disaster that changed everything. On the morning of July 27th, organizers made a last-minute decision to switch the show's location from one side of the airfield to the opposite side. This wasn't a minor adjustment. It meant moving spectator zones, changing flight patterns, and completely altering the layout that pilots had been briefed on. These changes were rushed and chaotic, and crucially, neither Topar nor Yegorov were informed about them. The pilots were about to perform a complex aerial routine over a crowd they couldn't locate, using maps that no longer matched reality. As Topar and Yegorov approached the airfield to begin their routine, radio communications revealed the deadly confusion that was unfolding. With over 8,000 people on the ground, including senior military officials in distinctive uniforms, you'd think the crowd would be impossible to miss from a cockpit. Yet the pilots couldn't see the spectators at all. The chilling exchange captured on cockpit voice recordings tells the story. Where are the spectators? I don't know where they are. When Topar finally spotted the audience, they weren't where he expected. They were on the complete opposite side of the aircraft. Under pressure to continue the show and with senior officials watching, air traffic control ordered the pilots to proceed, despite the obvious confusion. Military pilots are trained to follow orders, and that's exactly what Topar and Yegorov did, even as safety violations became increasingly apparent. For several minutes, they faultlessly performed their routine, but the confusion about crowd placement meant they were executing maneuvers in the wrong airspace, sometimes flying directly over spectators' heads. Then the mechanical problems began. During a half-barrel roll, Topar noticed that both engines had decreased thrust, causing their airspeed to fall dangerously low. Flying slower than planned, the pair descended to just 200 meters above ground level before immediately pulling up to enter a loop with a turn. This maneuver was supposed to run parallel to the spectators, but given the mismatched layout compared to their flight plans, they were flying head-on toward a large group of people instead. As the Su-27 exited the loop, it continued descending at high speed. Topar fought desperately to gain control of the jet, but it was getting too close to the ground. For a brief moment, as the plane began to level out, it looked like the pilots might avoid catastrophe. But as they approached the tree line in front of the spectators, it became clear they were too low to regain altitude in time. The jet's left wing struck a tree branch and veered toward the ground. Amazingly, the wingtip then touched the concrete, and the plane briefly leveled out, flying just inches above the ground past terrified bystanders. But the situation was beyond saving. Topar could not pull up, and the jet rushed toward a parked transport aircraft with nowhere to go. In those final seconds, with nothing left they could do, Yegorov pulled the ejector toggle just before their jet collided with the parked plane. The impact sent their Su-27 cartwheeling through the air. After several violent rotations, it slammed into the ground and exploded, hurtling into the crowd at high speed. As if this wasn't horrific enough, the debris caught and dragged a section of barbed wire fencing along the asphalt, casting a deadly net of destruction through families who had come to enjoy a peaceful afternoon. When the wreckage finally came to rest, the immediate aftermath was beyond comprehension. Scorching jet fuel, twisted metal shrapnel, and barbed wire had ripped through a crowd consisting largely of local families. Some spectators tried desperately to escape the carnage, while others stood frozen, paralyzed by what they were witnessing. People cried out for relatives they would never see again, while others simply walked away, unable to bear the sight of dismembered loved ones. One veteran pilot who had attended the show with his wife and 3 children left, with only 2 surviving sons. "My first thought was my wife and son," he later recalled. "The runway was full of human remains. It was hell." Topar and Yegorov escaped unharmed, their ejector seats saving their lives as they landed several hundred feet from the wreckage. It's impossible to imagine what went through their minds as emergency services tried to deal with the chaos they had inadvertently caused. The final toll was staggering: 77 people dead and 543 injured, many of them children. Among the victims was a 4-year-old child found lying on deceased bodies at the airfield. The trauma of witnessing the disaster affected his speech and mental development permanently, but the Ukrainian government's response to these victims would prove almost as shocking as the disaster itself. The state allocated only $200,000 total to be shared among all the families of the deceased, an insulting sum that averaged less than $3,000 per victim. Even worse, the distribution appeared completely random, with payments ranging from $7,000 to $40,000 for no apparent reason. The injured received even less support, with extremely low payments for medical care. That traumatized 4-year-old child, whose life was forever changed by what he witnessed and experienced, received just $2,000 in compensation from his government. With public outrage mounting and international attention focused on Ukraine, authorities moved quickly to assign blame. The head of the Air Force was dismissed, but the real scapegoating was just beginning. Despite overwhelming evidence of systemic organizational failures, blame fell squarely on the pilots, particularly Vladimir Topar, who became the primary target of prosecution. Topar wasn't some rookie pilot making careless mistakes. With 27 years of experience and membership in the elite Ukrainian Falcons, he had performed every maneuver in that day's routine many times before without incident. Evidence allegedly showed he had performed them correctly during the flight, yet this was disregarded at his trial. The 3 judges overseeing the case were employees of the Ministry of Defense, creating an obvious conflict of interest as they were essentially judging their own institution's failures. The pilot's defense revealed the true scope of the disaster's causes. First, the information provided to them was completely incorrect due to the last-minute venue changes. Topar had been given wrong crowd placement data and an outdated aerodrome layout, leaving him genuinely unsure of where spectators were positioned. He had repeatedly radioed air traffic control for confirmation, but was ordered to continue flying anyway. Second, the Su-27 itself was a mechanical time bomb. By 2002, Ukraine's military fleet consisted largely of aging Soviet-era aircraft, with only 15% of their 700 planes considered fit for operation. The specific Su-27 flown at Sknyliv had undergone faulty maintenance, with engine RPM reportedly lower than it should have been. Topar later testified that he had reported engine problems mid-flight, but was ordered by ground control to continue the routine anyway. Finally, the event itself violated every known airshow safety protocol. There were no proper safety margins, crowds had been placed dangerously close to the action on both sides of the runway, and there were no clear escape routes for aircraft in distress. These problems were evident to experienced pilots in attendance, yet organizers prioritized keeping the show going regardless of the risks. Despite these overwhelming systemic failures, the inquiry focused narrowly on Topar's actions in the final moments. Prosecutors ignored evidence of his correct maneuvers throughout most of the flight and painted him as recklessly attempting dangerous stunts. While Topar's decision to attempt a complex maneuver with known engine problems was questionable, it came after a cascade of institutional failures that had created an impossible situation. 22 years later, the evidence of a cover-up is undeniable. The investigation results and final report remain unpublished to this day, a clear sign that authorities have something to hide. Key evidence showing Topar performed maneuvers correctly was ignored at trial. Most telling of all is the stark disparity in how the convicted parties were treated afterward. Vladimir Topar was sentenced to 14 years in prison and served every single day. Even after his release, he must report to authorities once a month, has been banned from operating any vehicle, including bicycles, and commutes to work on rollerblades while paying off millions in fines. Meanwhile, his co-pilot Yegorov was released after serving only 3 years. 2 senior officials received suspended sentences or were released early, and one still works in the Air Force today, despite his conviction. This isn't justice. It's institutional protection disguised as accountability. The pilot who had no control over the venue changes, faulty maps, denied practice time, and mechanical failures bore the full weight of punishment. The officials whose decisions created the deadly conditions walked away virtually unscathed. The official narrative wants us to believe that an experienced pilot with 27 years of flying and elite aerobatic team membership suddenly became reckless and incompetent on that July afternoon. They want us to ignore the last-minute venue changes, the faulty equipment, the aging aircraft fleet, and the organizational chaos that multiple pilots had already identified as dangerous. But the evidence tells a different story, one of institutional failure, scapegoating, and cover-up. The unpublished investigation reports suggest authorities found evidence they didn't want to reveal. The conflicted judges ensured the military wouldn't judge itself too harshly, and the disparate punishments reveal who the system really wanted to protect. 22 years later, the truth about Sknyliv remains buried beneath unpublished reports and institutional protection. While Vladimir Topar still reports monthly to authorities and commutes to work on rollerblades, banned even from bicycles, the officials who created the deadly conditions that day walk free. Some still work in the very Air Force that scapegoated him. The families who received random insulting compensation deserve justice. The pilot who served 14 years for institutional failures deserves vindication. And the aviation community deserves the truth about what really happened when a government chose protection over accountability. Was Sknyliv really pilot error, or the most successful cover-up in aviation history? The evidence suggests we've been told a lie for over 2 decades. What do you think happened? Was Topar a scapegoat or truly guilty? Let me know your thoughts in the comments and tell me what aviation cover-up you'd like me to investigate next. If this investigation opened your eyes to the truth, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories they don't want you to know. Until next time, keep questioning the official story.